All right. Good night. Good night. Good night. Good night. Apologies for me typing. I need to sign into our YouTube account to stream this there. But tonight is the final night of our small business funding series, and this is going to be a really good one. We have Tino Sands, who is with us. He is a board of director with our Link Ventures. He is very much so an entrepreneur, and we'll let him talk about his experience from the corporate standpoint with his background, but also his entrepreneurial experience. So we have been doing this series for the last, I want to say 8 weeks or so. So we've met every 2 weeks to have a conversation about the different aspects of funding. So we opened up with talking about writing a good pitch and a business plan. Then we moved on to how to find funding. Then we moved on to the parts of the business plan, not the business plan, sorry, how to build out your financials, which is really, really good. And we had Davinia Bain on with us. And as a culmination tonight, we're talking about navigating the application process. And we wanted Tino to join us because he has done this. He has been approved for some substantial money. He doesn't have to say how much, but also what he has done as far as being in the space and carving out his own niche. So without further ado, we also have Matthew on with us as well, who is the vice president of Arrow Link. And let's clap it up for Tino. You could introduce yourself. That's like just imagine fanfare and clapping going on in the background as intro
Right,
music.
right. Good night, and thank you for the introduction. I am one of the founding members of Arrow Link Ventures, which I think everyone has now had the pleasure of working with. Banker by profession, finance is my background, but I've always had a passion for entrepreneurship. I think, as is usually the case, you go through corporate life or corporate world, and you start to get bitten by this bug of curiosity, thinking that there is more out there for you. And I was no different. Having a banking job, I decided that I wanted to give entrepreneurship a try. I did a lot of trying, I did a lot of failing. More recently, I've had some successes with my beachwear and accessories brand called Vita Kayo. And so I'm happy to kind of share some of the experiences that I've had, some of the successes, some of the failures, and perhaps provide some guidance for anyone who may find some value in my journey, in order to help you guys navigate your own.
Okay, awesome. So thank you for that. So you say that you became curious, right? Out of all of the businesses, why did you pick what you picked? And did you have any sort of background in it?
I didn't. I would say, in a sense, it chose me. So the idea came as a result of something completely different, right? I was pretty much bored with the job that I had, and I was looking for something else. So I started down the path of studying for the GMAT. My plan was to go to grad school to get into consulting. As I was sitting in the library night after night, not focusing on the studies that I should have been focusing on, randomly the idea came into my head about our currency and how people would always talk about how amazing it was, how colorful it was, and I kind of brushed it out of my mind, figuring I need to focus on my studies. 5 minutes later, I thought to myself, yeah, but if I was to do something with that, what would I do? Brushed that aside again. Didn't think about it anymore. But as the days went on, there was just little gnawing voice in my head saying, like, there may be something here. We should give it a try. So ultimately, I decided to use the Bahamian currency to create functional souvenirs. I thought, we in the Bahamas we see a lot of tourists. If there was something to focus on, if there was an area to focus on, the area where there's critical mass would be a good place to start. Tourism being the largest industry, we see millions of people every year. It just felt like it would be worth a shot. And so I never set out to do it. I just wanted to quiet the voice in my head. And it started off as just a souvenir brand, and it evolved over time into a full-on beachwear and accessories brand. So I didn't choose it; it chose me.
Good. I asked that specifically because a lot of entrepreneurs think that they're crazy. If they have this idea, they have no background. It's almost like, where's the audacity coming from? So you had no background in design, fashion, anything like that.
Absolutely not. And what I learned throughout the process is if you're fueled by passion and curiosity, you will figure it out. The answers are there. So it's not as if you're trying to do something that has not been done in some way, shape, or form. Once you're curious enough, you will get access. You'll find access to the information that you need to find access to. Just today, I was listening to someone speak. He was talking about Elon Musk, and how he had no background coming from finance in terms of PayPal. He had no background in rocket science, but was curious, figured that there was a problem that he could solve. So he just bought all of the rocket science books he could, and delved into those to try to learn as much as he could. That is a testament to your ability to learn what you need to learn, to achieve the goal that you want to achieve. And you don't have to be an expert on day one. You just have
Mhm.
to know more tomorrow than you do today. And within 6 months, a year, you will be much further along in the process, and you'll figure it out. If it is a passion of yours, you'll
Mhm.
figure it out.
Okay. So you decided to try to make this thing a reality, which you did. But what steps did you take immediately after, once you realized that you wanted to make this what if a reality?
Research was the first thing, because it was a physical product. And now I started to look, okay, well, where if I were to do this, where would I source this project, the product? Who would I reach out to? What information would I need to know? What sort of formats would I need designs to be in? What would it cost? What is the language that I need to use? People say, I mean, it may be common knowledge now, but MOQ, minimum order quantity, was something. The first time I heard it, I thought to myself, What is this they're talking about?" And so I started to follow brands online. I started to read books. I started to get my hands on as much information as possible, just so I can familiarize myself with some of the language that would be needed for me to start to communicate with persons I would need to communicate with to be able to push this idea forward.
Mhm. So, what year did you decide that you were going to push it forward?
Boy, it's kind of blurry here because I want to say the idea came to me in 2014.
Okay.
Um, I spent maybe a year and a half on the research part of it, building a business plan, doing my firsthand research in terms of the cruise market, the tourist market, I should say. And so, yeah, I would say I launched the company in 2016, or I incorporated the company in 2016. So it was about a year and a half
Mhm.
after having the idea that I formed the company, and I think I had my first sale in January of 2017.
Nice. So, at what point do you decide, and Matthew could hop in at any point, but at what point do you decide, I need to expand? I need money from the outside, whether outside is family, friends, or you need investors, formal investors.
Well, I would say that the funny thing is, and now in hindsight, it is kind of amusing to me. I thought I needed money and external money from the outset, right? I had this grandiose idea of how big I would make this, and the only way to make it that big was to get millions of dollars from wherever I can get it from. You learn later on that that is not as necessary as you think it is. You just need enough to get going, and then you need enough to keep going. But I would say, when after having the experience and growing the business, and in hindsight, I can say that when you need money is when money will actually be a catalyst for growth. So you may need a few dollars to get started. Yes, that's absolutely necessary. Um, but you don't necessarily need significant funding to be able to get some sort of traction to prove proof of concept, right? You can do that organically through your sweat equity, reaching out to your network, to be able to validate the idea. I didn't know that at the time, hence my going through the process of trying to get funding from the get go. But if I could do it over again, I would take the bootstrap route, to be able to validate the idea, because that also shows your investors that you've pressure tested your idea, that you've iterated on your idea to be able to get it to a point where it's worthy of investment. And I would say, one of the things that also came to me later on was the idea of friends and family funding, because people typically tend to look at high net worth individuals, or organizations that do funding, or provide funding for this investment, and the thinking is, oh, there's money to spare. This is what they do. They have money to spare. If they lose it, there's no big deal. But there's an underlying assumption there that perhaps the idea is not strong enough, to be able to make it, and that's always a possibility. But I think a good way to gauge how good your idea is whether or not you'd be willing to have your friends and family invest in this idea, because unlike a high net worth individual who has money to burn, or an entity that does this, and so it's a numbers game where one out of every 100 needs to hit, and so if that one hits, they do well. Your friends and family don't necessarily have the disposable income. They could bet that that monies would be better suited towards a retirement plan, towards a pension plan, schooling, or something of the sort. And so if you're going through this idea and pitching it and thinking to yourself, would I feel comfortable taking what may be the last, which may be what someone would have worked for 10, 20, 30 plus years, would I feel comfortable having those individuals invest in this idea? I think if the answer is yes, you can fairly say that you really believe in this project. Now, it still may not work, but at the very least, knowing that it is something that you would be willing to accept money from your close friends and family for, says to me that you would have gone through every eventuality, and that you believe that you have something worth investing in and worth risking, possible relationships, or at the very least what your friends and family would have worked a really long time for.
Yeah, that's a good litmus
I
test.
don't remember what you asked specifically for that, but that was just something that I really needed to get off of my chest, because it is something that I experienced. I was at a point where I wanted money from everywhere and I wanted lots of it. But in the back of my mind, again, thinking hindsight, I thought to myself, but I don't want to put my last into this idea. And the fact that I had that idea meant to me that I really didn't believe in it.
Oh, yes. I have heard straight out of someone's mouth. I would rather get an investor because I don't want to lose my own money. So immediately in my mind, I'm thinking, so one, you don't believe in it. Two, you have no skin in the game. You want no skin in the game, but you want to reap all the benefits.
Yeah, you want someone else to take a bet on you when you're not taking a bet on you. Tony Robbins said you got to burn the boats, right? If there's no way back, the only way is through.
Yeah, yeah. Matthew, you want to jump in? You have any thoughts, questions so far?
No, no, just smiling at all the truth.
Okay, so who did you initially go to when you decided that you actually need money to grow?
I reached out to somewhere between 70 and 85 potential investors. And that's people that are in the Bahamas, entities in the Bahamas, entities globally. Um, entities in Jamaica, I think, was probably the next heaviest concentration in terms of share numbers, because I know that they're very big on the kind of venture investing. But I was reaching out to everyone essentially. Again, more of a numbers game, and you realize too, that first no you get hits really hard. It hurts. It stings because in your mind, after having put so much work and effort into this idea and the business plan, conceptualizing and thinking you've crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's, you're thinking to yourself, hey, I'm going to present this in front of some investors and they're going to think I'm the best thing ever. They're just going to throw the money at me. So when you're hit with that decline, that no, it hurts your ego. But you realize, at least I've realized, that each no stings a little bit more, stings a little bit less, right? And so you build up a tolerance to the no until the point where it's just like, oh, okay, fine, this is just another, it's just another part of the process. And so my thinking after the first few no's, I realized that it was essentially a slow boat to China, right? I need to accelerate the process, try to get as many no's as I possibly can to be able to get me to the yes. But what you also realize is that in with each no gives you an opportunity to strengthen the pitch, because if you're lucky, the person you're asking for an investment will have some reason as to why it's not the right fit for them, right? You take that input and you look at your business plan. In some cases, there may not be any changes because it may be specific to that individual, but in other cases, it may be a broader implication of what you're putting forth, and so it gives you the opportunity to kind of fill that gap for the next pitch. And so, from a numbers perspective, there's also some value in being able to get different perspectives on the idea on the business model, because that gives you a more solid foundation for when you go to the next investor. And eventually, if the idea is good enough, you will be able to attract some sort of funding, be it equity funding, debt funding, or whatever have you, grants if you're lucky.
Yeah, I think people don't understand, like, more work begins, maybe even the real work begins once you get investor money or once you get someone to commit to give you money. So can you talk about that process of what happens when you get money or you get a promise of money, and what does that journey look like?
Right. So I mean, the first stage obviously is the approvals, but the approval is always subject to, and that's where the rubber really starts to meet the road, because that is when you need to ensure that your corporate formation documents are all in place. Someone can't take equity in an entity that doesn't exist. And so, if you would not have done, I mean, I would hope that anyone that's going to request funding would have already ensured that all of that is in place. But if you hadn't, then it would be the time to make sure that you shore that up. Um, I would say there's also an element, depending on where you are in the stage of the process. If you would have inflated some historic numbers, now you have to show proof that what you said you did is actually what you did. So your bank statements are going to be important, going to be references that are going to be required. Depending on the business that you're in, they may require references from existing clients. If you would have made them up, then obviously that comes to bear. So really, is just the investor is now validating much of the things that you said. They're now doing further due diligence, because the approval is based on the concept, based on what you presented to them as an idea for how their funds can help you to supercharge what you've done. But now they have to do due diligence on you, the person, as well as the history of your business. The other side is, we spoke about, persons perhaps not wanting to put skin in the game. A part of what is required is a personal statement of affairs. So with that, that's going to say, what your income is. If you have a really big, highfalutin job making tons of money, but yet you're asking them for 20,000 when you bank, that's a problem. That gives people pause, because, well, why aren't you investing in yourself? Similarly, if you have tons of debt, car loans and vacation loans and all these other sorts of things, that also gives them pause, because the thinking is, well, you haven't made the best decisions with the money that you had and made personally. Why would I, as an investor, now all of a sudden believe you will start to make good decisions with money? And so, while the business idea has to be sound and strong, there's a holistic picture to it. And you can think of it from your perspective. Why would you give money to someone who you don't think is a good steward of that money, just because they have a great smile and they say the right things in a meeting? They're very passionate about their idea. That's not enough when it comes time to separate an individual from their money.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Um, I wasn't actually aware that they went into your personal, basically like a credit score, kind of.
Right. I mean, we obviously, yeah, exactly. That's our equivalent of it. We don't have a credit score, at least not yet. But yeah, they want to know what your financial state is. And a part of it is also, it's not necessarily to catch, how much money you make, or how many loans you have. But I think I look at it also from a perspective of perhaps similar to what they do with politicians, right? Where you request it now, and you may request it randomly at some point in the future. Perhaps the thinking being, let's use this as another check to see whether or not the funds that we had given you or provided for you have been kind of misallocated in some way, shape, or form. I don't know that to be something that they actually do, but if it were me, it's something that I would reserve the right to do, especially in cases where money has been invested, but milestones in terms of revenue and profitability have not been hit. The questions start to come. Well, why is that? Where did it go? Where did we go wrong? What may have gone off the rails?
Yeah. So you said you applied to 70 to 85, I think you said 70 to 85.
Yeah, between 70 and 85, and that's individuals. Again, more family and friends, persons who I thought were interested in alternative investments, investment firms, SBDC, venture, Bombs Venture, Entrepreneurial Venture Fund. Essentially, every entity and individual I can think of that may have had some interest in my business.
Yeah. So if you don't mind sharing, what is one or two pieces of feedback that you were puzzled by at the time, or you're still puzzled by now in that process?
My The thing that I'm still not sure on in terms of the thought process is, I know here locally there's a thought to want to essentially cap the 0 to 1 kind of growth. So if you're a new business, to cap what you can essentially do in the first year. I'm not entirely clear on why that is, because I mean, if you're starting from zero, 100%, 200% growth. I mean, it's you starting from zero, so you can go from 0 to 10, and that's a lot. 0 to 100, 0 to 10,000, 0 to 100,000. But there seems to be some discomfort around persons starting out and then projecting $1 million in revenue. And I think if you look at it as, if you're going to have a stall on Iraqi, okay, maybe that's a stretch. But if you're doing a technology business that has a large addressable market that solves a really significant problem, that is not that much of a stretch. And so it feels like a desire to want to kind of box all ideas in and lump them into the same essential box that I think is unfair to business owners. From the perspective of the investors or the firms, I can see them perhaps wanting to curtail the vision of and the dreams of overly enthusiastic entrepreneurs. But I do think it causes um, it causes a challenge in terms of what it is you're in the market to do. The other side is, and I think it now compounds this first issue, is that you're also capped in terms of the year over year growth. So if I believe I can do 10 million in the first year, and it is quite possible, but you're telling me no, that's too much. You can only do 100,000. Okay, fine. I figured, no problem. My 0 to 1 may be more tamed, but then I will be able to ramp up year over year until I reach a more mature state where it's, 50, 60% year over year growth. Here locally, it's capped at 10%. So now you've essentially clipped my wings again. You're saying that I can't do 10 million. I can only do 100. And then from that 100, I can only grow 10% year over year. And so it doesn't allow for the work that the entrepreneur would have done in terms of the market research and the issue, the target audience, the size of the problem you're solving. It doesn't allow a lot of that work to really shine through. It's just being limited, but and I don't know where the forces are and what's the overarching thought process, but I do think that's a process that kind of limits, or a line of thinking that limits the ability for entrepreneurs to really kind of showcase the work that they've put forth in that discovery process.
So I want to play a little bit of a, maybe not devil's advocate, right?
Mhm.
But you've been in the space long enough to know that many businesses are not quote unquote innovative, right?
Absolutely.
They are, I don't want to use the B word, but they're conservative.
Mhm.
Yes. So in a sense, I can understand why the thought is you want to sell clothing, but maybe it's fast fashion clothing. You would be
Mhm.
hard pressed to make $1 million in the Bahamian local market only to make $1 million in your first year, even your first 2 years in revenue. So I think maybe that is a guardrail there because so many people don't know how to temper realistically their expectations and their forecasts. Maybe. Or maybe that's what these institutions have seen historically with data. But I agree with you. I do think that they don't necessarily do it on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes to say, you know, yeah, that's 10%, but you over here could probably do 50.
Agreed.
But
Agreed. No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I do think, I mean, a part of being an entrepreneur, you essentially have to have this delusional quality to think that you're going to do something that has not been done, or everyone else would have failed, but you won't. So I get that completely, and I do understand that. I think though there has to be comparables have to be injected into the mix as well, right? I don't think you should lump every business idea into the same bucket. As well as I don't think you're going to assume that every business idea is going to be a unicorn. There needs to be some kind of meeting of minds somewhere down the middle. And I think if there is valid justification and comparables to what is being proposed, then that should also be something that's considered by those who are reviewing these applications.
yeah, I think that's one critique that I would say in some of these organizations that are providing funding locally is, I may get in trouble for this, but that's fine, is the fact that, you have people who are judging the food restaurants, who are also judging the tech, innovative companies, who are judging the fashion and clothing and nuances of that and the accessories. But they don't necessarily have people with the bandwidth in particular to deal with the tech companies or the things that can be unicorn-esque. And so they again are putting up these standard metrics to these things that if they operated outside of the Bahamas or even outside of the Caribbean, the numbers would look different, the forecast would look different, the expectations would be different.
I agree wholeheartedly, but I think even when you look at the businesses like the retail and others, I do think there's an element of a longer term kind of focus and a wider kind of strategic focus, because even in an instance of business with online and the fact that everyone shops online, and if you can solve the problem, you're not limited to this market, right? And so it may be a situation where, yes, here in the Bahamas, the most that you can make with a clothing brand is going to be $100,000 a year. But if you have something that's niche enough through Amazon, through Etsy, Shopify, if you can set up fulfillment in the US, all of a sudden it opens you up to a much wider market. And I think those entities here, while the first hurdle is to get businesses funded and supporting themselves, I do think there should be a focus toward getting entrepreneurs to think outside of the borders of the Bahamas. And now, mind you, an entrepreneur, in my mind, should be thinking big anyway. But if you're being capped at what you can achieve here, I'm not entirely sure that those entities or persons working within those entities will welcome the idea of you wanting to branch out and grow beyond the borders of the Bahamas. I don't know that to be the case. I don't know it not to be the case, but I don't know it to be the case.
Yeah, again, I still think that there'll still be a capping. Okay, so you want to open an online store. Okay, cool. But so you grow from 10% to 12.
True, true. I mean, and so I do think though it's a part of there needs to be perhaps some growth on everyone's part, right? Those that are reviewing these applications, as well as the entrepreneurs. There needs to be. It also has to be a situation where someone would have had to do it, right? Someone has to be first. So as soon as there is a first to branch out outside of these borders in something that is perhaps not as sexy as technology, then all of a sudden everyone would get to take a step back and say, "Oh, okay, well, you know what? This has been done. Here's a roadmap for how it was done in this first instance. Okay, that provides a path for others to possibly do it as well." I do have a question too. I would be curious to get both of your feedback and thoughts on it. One of the things that I've also been thinking about is, I think it is not impossible for someone who is not an entrepreneur, who would not have gone through that entrepreneurial journey, to provide valid criticism and critique of a business idea. That's not unheard of. I am curious though, when you think about the percentage of people who are essentially the gatekeepers for determining whether or not a business deserves funding. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, by and large, majority of those people would not have started a business in their lives. They would have been more of those who are more theoretical entrepreneurs as opposed to practical entrepreneurs. One, do you think that that assessment is correct? And two, do you think that that has hindered the progress that a lot of entrepreneurs have been able to make up to this point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I might say 50-50.
Okay.
Some are theoretical, some they have businesses. But I think that the perception generally is that I don't want to say this projecting because I don't know the attitude and belief of every single person at these different entities, but I think generally the expectation is that we're not necessarily innovative people to the extent of, and I've heard comments to the extent of, can we create something that is Facebook that can change the world? And this is a conversation though that is in the wider Caribbean, however you say it, right? It's any of us, are we capable in the region of producing something that, like we benchmark social media as before Facebook, after Facebook. Can we create something that impactful? I think so, but part of it is exposure. And it's a challenge if the people who are judging these applications don't have exposure.
Fair point. Anything to add to that, Maddie?
I mean, for sure, I agree mostly with that assessment. One thing that immediately comes to mind when you ask this question is we don't have the solid data. This is perhaps something that we should look into adding to our survey as we will be gathering a lot of data on an upcoming project. So I would be really interested to know, well, one, if we could get that data. Extracting data is like trying to get water from rocks around here. But secondarily, I would be super interested in knowing what the actual answers are. My guess is that, whether it's 50-50 or more, 40-60, or even skewing 30-70, I think there are enough people in these positions that have the experience of entrepreneurship, right? I don't know that they are evenly dispersed gatekeepers. Like there may be some log jams along the way where these theoretical people are holding things up. And especially in a small place where we are, where relationships mean so much, I think it would be foolish of us to pretend that not having relationships with these entities, if not with the particular people, is not beneficial. It's not going to change outcome of your assessment by these financial institutions. Having someone to go to bat for you, I think, is an important thing in these boardrooms in a small society like this. It's not something that I like to say, but I think that that's the truth.
It's the reality. Absolutely.
I do want to back up what Sean is saying though about the general mentality that we are not in a particular headspace to believe that certain things can come true. And I think that some of that is warranted. I think that delusional people who think that they're going to make $100 million here in this market is a problem. But like you said, it doesn't have to be made here. You could get a stronghold, get a foothold, build it out nice, and let this be your base to go and conquer the world. But it's a seesaw in that, like, the environmental problems of the mentality around you and the people who hold these gatekeeper positions is gonna have a detrimental effect on you. But then also being delusional yourself is gonna have a problem. But then if the environment is too down on entrepreneurship, then you're not likely to be thinking innovatively either. So there's a serious chicken and egg problem here. And finding just the right touch of delusion and curiosity that will take you past incompetence into, just being able to grow and be able to execute is a tricky thing. And it comes with a lot of sacrifice. So, sure, people may be being kept back, but also I don't want to overstate how many people we have to be successful on a certain level. And I don't think that every business has to be, multi-decamillion or $100 million businesses. They don't. But it's all about what does that entrepreneur want for that particular business. So that's my long-winded answer.
So, and I hear that point. I think one of the things that is usually missing or forgotten when you start to think about innovation, right? Those many businesses that would have innovated and would have seen that kind of hockey stick effect in terms of ballooning to multi-billion-dollar valuations, many of them would have started with things that are not that sexy. So we use Netflix as an example, right? They started with CD. I mean, there's nothing, there was nothing, it was a rental business, right? A physical CD that you went, fine, there was a machine involved that you could use as a vending machine to get your CD. But it wasn't until they were forced essentially to pivot because the business model was not sustainable or wasn't working, or technology around them would have been changing. Either way, there would have been some things that would have happened that their ability to pivot allowed them to then transition to what we know now as this super innovative entity. And even in my own experience, whereas one, I'm thinking bigger than I was thinking when I was initially looking for these for the funding, but then also I am now more attuned to opportunities and ideas in terms of rapid growth and being able to turn the business into something well beyond what I expected from a revenue generating perspective. A lot of these things though don't happen until you've gotten past that first obstacle, right? If you never get to open, if you never get to a point where you're generating sufficient revenue to be able to cover expenses and be able to test certain things that you think may work but were too afraid to try because your resources were too limited, then you never get an opportunity to really be able to maximize what the business can do, right? And so I understand from the perspective of those who might be looking at these ideas, oh, this doesn't feel innovative enough. But I think we also need to think and start to assess ideas based on more on the individual, right? Their ability to persevere, their persistence, their ability to pivot. And you can, these are things that you can kind of glean through interactions with individuals based on the experience that they've had throughout their life in other ways. But I do think that if we are looking for this incredibly innovative idea, it's going to change the world from day one. I do think we do entrepreneurs a disservice because many of them, or at the very least a handful of them, may find themselves down that path if given the opportunity to kind of see things off of the ground and see their way clear of the initial hurdles that they find in front of them.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think that we need these financial institutions on the whole in net to be making more bets. That's what the bottom line is on it, and to develop more robustly a culture of entrepreneurship. You take more bets, you get more winners, you get more winners, you get more of the winning capability and mentors, and just the culture grows. But that said, we know that's not the case right now. And so what that means is, forearmed with that knowledge, you have to go in there knowing this is the obstacle. And this is, therefore, I must do this, this, and this to get over that obstacle.
Absolutely, and that is so. So, Shauna, you would have asked the question in terms of what I found to be the case in terms of the application. What was I surprised by? What I still find surprising, and notwithstanding the fact that I think there are limiting sort of beliefs in terms of revenue generation and growth that's imposed onto entrepreneurs. I do think anyone applying needs to understand that is the environment, and understand how best to navigate through that minefield. The game is being able to satisfy the requirements in a way that's not dishonest, to be able to get to that next stage in your growth process for your business. And so I do think there are ways to do it. I mean, my application essentially had to be dialed back for the same reason. But me understanding that this was more of a bridge. I know what the business was capable of doing, but I needed to dial it back to make those who were reviewing the application, make them more comfortable with what was being presented. And I knew that once I can get some funding, I would be able to then supercharge and achieve the things that I had hoped for, which works well because you now outperform what the expectations were. And for an investor, I mean that's the best case scenario.
I like that. So I was writing notes for things to come back to. Mentorship. Matthew said the word mentorship. Have you had mentors along this journey?
Yes, but not in the way that I had envisioned. So in my mind, I would have expected it to be, some individual who was multimillionaire, billionaire, who tapped me on my shoulder and said, "Hey, you know what? I see something in you. I see a younger me. Let me take you under my wing and guide you along the path. That's what I was hoping for, and I realized that I essentially missed many de facto mentors because of what I was looking for. I had this image in my mind. What I learned later on is that you essentially need someone to pour into you, someone to change your perspective on something. That can be through one single conversation. That can be a comment that's made. That can be someone recommending a book to you or sharing a video with you. And so I would say through all of these experiences and interactions, I've been able to kind of piece together one mentor. And obviously, the internet is perhaps the best mentor for any of us who are willing to really kind of go down various rabbit holes that we are able to. And so that was majority of the input that I would have gotten and guidance that I would have gotten would have been kind of pieced together. But in more recent times, I was able to connect with someone who is a friend of friends, a friend of families, who essentially would have gone through a similar application process, would have gotten his nose, would have finally gotten a yes, would have established a business, would have had this business grow and thrive. Actually, would have gotten to a point where he achieved an exit for his business, where it was bought by an international company. Obviously, we don't have many examples of that, and so I was lucky to be able to have that sort of a person within arm's reach. But I also realized in learning more about his journey, he started out really, really rough as well. I mean, to the point where, he would have gotten funding or leveraged assets from family, and those assets were lost. And in hindsight, he realizes where he went wrong. But that was more important to me, or more valuable to me, I found, than the successes, right? Which we don't hear much of. People are very quick to sing from the rooftops all of their successes and how great they are and how wonderful their business is, and you learn something from that. But I think you learn more from the downfall, right? How did they pivot? Where did they think they went wrong? Because now you get to avoid some of those same mistakes. You get to now understand, where their blind spots were, why they were able to get blindsided by whatever came that they didn't anticipate. And so, I did have that ability, I guess, and that luxury of having a quote unquote mentor in a more traditional sense, but that came much later.
Yeah, I will tell anyone, if you could find a mentor. I personally like organic mentorship. But if the person says, hey, you gotta pay me, you gotta whatever it is, soak up the knowledge. Absolutely soak it up.
No, I agree with you. I mean, it would be incredible if you could find that. One of the things that I attempted to do at one point was just reach out to people who I thought could be really good mentors, and then just offer my services in some way, shape, or form, right? Just in an effort to be able to be in their space, to be able to have these conversations. Now that didn't necessarily work for me in the way that I hoped, but I do think you have to be creative in your approach as well, because you have to think that if someone is in a position that you think can add some value to your journey, their time is valuable. And so the question becomes, what is it about you and what you may be asking of them that they think is worth their time to pour into you? And it just becomes a very difficult sort of assessment to do as an individual, because we would like to think that people are just going to give up their time freely, and in some cases that will happen. I think it depends on where individuals are in their life journey. If they're at a point where they're thinking more legacy and reaching back to pull someone up, then you may luck out. But if they're also still on just a different phase of their journey of growth and attacking the world, taking the bull by the horns, then it just becomes a very difficult thing to allocate time to you, unless you're friends or family.
or you're
I
being
would,
paid.
Yeah,
or you're being paid. But again, I mean, are you able to afford
right,
what the value of their time is? And if you could,
right.
would that money be better allocated towards some other resource?
Well, you got to make that you got to make that call. But I'll say two things here. One is if you can't afford it, right? What does it take for you to do in kind, for lack of a better word? How do you build that relationship? How do you do enough for a person that they like, you know what? This is actually worth my while in giving back a little time to this person, right? Now, at the extreme end, there's a very popular trainer who took some of his well-earned cash, and you can't do this unless you have the money, but he will go to professionals, in this case, a psychiatrist, and said, "Hey, look, how much do you make in a week? I would like to pay you that for 2 days of your time." When you get this professional with all this distilled knowledge, giving you 2 days of their time, yes, a hefty price, but when you think about what you get out of it, the deal is a no-brainer if you have the money, you
I,
know?
I
So
I agree with
like
you. I agree with you 100%.
if you could lock
That's my
someone
if.
down for 2 hours, you ask them, listen, what are you making a day? Can they pay you that for 2 hours over lunch? You know, even the gesture of it might knock them into a different perspective.
Agreed. So there are two things. There are two things that I would say to that. Right. I do think. I think another element of it, another way to do that, depending on what you have to bring to the table, is more of the Gary V approach, where it's like just adding value, right? So through your conversations with individuals, you strike up enough interest in an individual, you get to know what kind of makes them tick. You get to understand what their hobbies are, what things they're interested in. If you find that someone has an affinity for antique cars, maybe all of a sudden you have their email, and instead of reaching out, hey, can you mentor me? You share photos of cars that you've seen, or links to car show events and different things. So all of a sudden they associate you with this thing that they love, they're passionate about, and you're pouring into them essentially by you just adding some value. There may be a time at which after having done that for some period of time, you say, hey, I'm curious. You're interested or you're passionate about X, Y, and Z. My passion is ABC. Do you have any ideas around how I should approach it? Right. This is now helping to feed your hunger for the thing that you're passionate about, that you may be trying to turn into a business. So that's one. That's another approach. If you don't have the money to be able to pay a daily, weekly, even hourly rate for a professional. The other thing that I will say that I've found in my experience, obviously as a banker, I've dealt with high net worth individuals. I've dealt with successful business owners and what have you. And we default to thinking that everyone who has been successful is somehow, I mean, leaps and bounds more intelligent than we are, that they have this kind of secret to the universe, right? And they do have a perspective. Their experiences would have certainly been able to inform some decisions and be able to give you some sort of guidance. But I've learned that we kind of superimpose the level of knowledge and intellect onto them. We assume that if we were in their position, the sort of knowledge and experience we would have to have had to get to that point will be, I mean, more valuable than any library of books. When you realize that there's an element of luck in every person's success. The smartest person is not going to be the person who is the wealthiest. The person who knows, the theoretical elements of business are usually teachers versus business owners. And so where it is important to get insights from individuals who have different perspectives and would have achieved a level of success, I've found that I've had to remind myself of the sobering thought that that treasure trove of knowledge that I'm hoping that someone just rests in my lap so that I get all the answers and can hit the easy button. that does not really exist in that way. So we do have to temper expectations. And so for those persons who may be thinking, hey, let me go take out this loan from Commonwealth Bank so I can pay this business owner for a week of their time, you may be sorely disappointed.
Yes, fair enough. And at the end of the day, like Shauna said, she prefers organic.
Absolutely.
It will benefit you far more to develop relationships and not look at it too transactionally, but if there is information like industry information that you can acquire and you're questioning whether or not you should spend the money, usually spend the money.
No, I agree. To the point of, in terms of, you do want someone who has a vested interest in your success, because then they will perhaps share some of the the truths about what you're trying to learn, the harsh truths, more readily, because they just want you to be aware of a situation. But I do think, to your point, in cases where institutional knowledge is critical to stopping you from making even more expensive mistakes, absolutely. To the extent that you can get someone who is well versed in that industry, you should absolutely do whatever you can to get that knowledge downloaded into your
Mhm.
consciousness.
That was a good deep dive into mentorship. I'll be glad to clip that and share it. Um, so when you say you dialed your application back, one of the things that we tell people, or I tell people, is you're sharing your business plan. It's kind of like a recipe. You cannot give people the entire full measurements of your recipe if you're cooking, baking, whatever it is. And same thing for your business plan. So talk about how you decide what you share, what you don't share, how much of it do you share when you're going through the funding process.
Sure. I mean, I think ultimately there's going to be a secret sauce. All right. The concept itself is, there's some value to it, obviously, because now you open people up to the possibility that this thing exists, that they may or may not have thought of before, but you now put it on their radar. But execution is where, I mean, that's really where it succeeds or dies, right? Having an idea is great. I'm sure many of us have grandiose ideas of many things that now are coming to fruition, but we didn't create Netflix, right? We may have thought of, hey, how cool would it be if I don't have to deal with blowing these VHS tapes and sticking them into this VCR, right? But you weren't able to execute on it, and so I would I would caution those who may think that just sharing the idea is somehow going to give someone else the advantage. So I would use my clothing line as an example. My idea was to incorporate elements of the Bahamian experience into this beachwear, right? We have 8 million people that come to the Bahamas for what the Bahamas has to offer. I thought it would be worthwhile to have functional souvenirs as memories of this experience, right? Something that you can go and take to other places along your journey that won't just sit on a shelf and catch dust. In theory, that's essentially what every souvenir it aspires to be. Where the secret sauce is essentially the kinds of designs that I have in my head that I'm going to work to bring to fruition. That's something I can't really explain to an extent that someone can replicate it. Even if I give my endeavored best to explain to the T what I'm envisioning, I won't be able to convey that messaging. And then two, even if I were to convey that messaging, the way that the person is going to take that and execute on that is going to be completely different than I would. The other thing would be being able to establish your list of vendors and your list of suppliers, right? That's something that you don't share with your investors, because they can then tap into it. Even if they get one or two vendors, they don't have the full suite of vendors. They don't have the attention to detail that you may have, so that when you get a sample, you realize that it doesn't have the kind of feel you're looking for, or the vibrancy of the colors is not quite where you want it to be, and so you make certain adjustments. These are all things that add to this recipe. That's that, that little pinch of salt that you only know that you needed to add because you tasted it, right? And it doesn't quite have that taste that you want it to have. And so there are little, and those T's that need to be crossed, those I's that need to be dotted based on the vision you have in your head, that even if you wanted to, you can't truly convey in a business plan. And so I think to the extent possible, it's important to be able to share the vision as clearly and concisely as you can. And then you need to have faith in yourself that even if someone took that blueprint and went to your suppliers or the equivalent of your contractors or whoever, that there's some element of you that's added to that equation that they just cannot replicate. And that, I mean, it is going to be the thing that makes or breaks the recipe, right? The finished product. I will give an example. My grandmother made what I thought was the best Milo ever, hot chocolate. And I would go to her house in the night, which was not that far from where I lived at the time, for her to make this hot chocolate. It would piss my mother off because she had to drop me. She had to take me there. And so I said, fine, get the recipe. You can make it at home. And then I don't have to try to go to my grandmother's house. My grandmother she laid out the recipe down to a pinch of salt in hot chocolate. I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, why would you add salt to hot chocolate? My mother followed the recipe to the T. She was on the phone with my grandmother. Now, you sure we got to add this? And how much of this? And it tasted completely different because there was that element of love or whatever the secret ingredient was that she just was not able to explain, that made her hot chocolate, as good as it was.
I like that. So maybe she didn't explain how she stirred 6 times instead of 4.
That,
Maybe not.
I
Or how
just
she
gotta
thought
say,
wonderful thoughts about her grandson while she was making it. I don't know.
that pinch of salt is a game changer, boy.
Absolutely.
I can
Absolutely.
attest to that.
So no, that is how I've had to come to that conclusion. I was also one that was very afraid of sharing too much information with the people that I was requesting funding from. And I've had experiences where I was burned by people who would have replicated my ideas when I pitched, them to buy wholesale from me and different things. All of those are a part of learning experience, right? They may be able to clip some of what you are going to do. They may be able to replicate a portion of it to the T, but it's all of the pieces that come together to create the wider picture. And ultimately, there's always room for more than one. And so that competition is going to force you to be better, and to try to outdo whatever copy version that they want to bring to the market. And ultimately, when you bump into those obstacles and those headwinds, it's going to be a passion for the idea that allows you to see your way through and to be able to persist to the other side. If someone is replicating an idea strictly because they think it's a good way for them to make money, when they come upon those obstacles that will make or break the idea, they won't have the passion and perseverance to be able to navigate those storms. And so you may start the same time, or they may even start ahead of you because they ran with your idea, but you're gonna catch up with them when they decide that, hey, this isn't for me. I thought it was gonna be easier.
Yeah, that's good. So, in closing, and anyone on the call can let us know if you have any questions. But, I want to ask you to walk through, you now have a storefront. You have a storefront in the Nassau Cruise Port.
Mhm.
And let me be like the people from the outside. What made you think you could be so audacious to open up a storefront where you are, potentially having hundreds of thousands tens of thousands of people walk past your store or potentially every day, what made you audacious enough to go after that move?
I ask myself that question often, to be honest with you. But I've always had this delusional notion that I can do something more than I am in any given moment. And when I looked back on the fact that some of my products didn't exist in the way that I've created them until I brought them into the world, that is a very intoxicating feeling, right? You take a concept from your brain, from between your ears, and you bring it into existence. I mean, there's something absolutely incredible about being able to do that. And as you iterate on that idea and you bring more concepts and different things to fruition, you start to feel like there's an element of invincibility. Like, I mean, I was able to do this, why not? Right? You may not think that it's absolutely possible, but at the very least you can think that there's a possibility, even if a slight chance, that you can make it work. And because as I started to build the brand, I wanted it to be bigger and bigger to really see if I can maximize its potential. The next step was a physical location, not because I wanted one. I always thought that I would stay away from a physical location. But I saw the opportunity when the National Cruise Port put out a news clipping for, what was it, a request for concept. And I convinced myself that it didn't make sense. I figured everything is political. There's clearly people who have already been earmarked for these spaces. I am not a very political person. I don't have those sorts of relationships, so I won't be selected. Then I said, okay, well, even if I was selected, I don't have the resources to be able to bring it to fruition. And so I mean, why would I even put myself in that position? Then I thought to myself, even if I was able to somehow secure the funding, I've never run a business before. I've never hired anyone. I don't have enough products and designs to be able to fill a store. That would be crazy for me to even attempt. And then after going through all of these reasons why I figured it will absolutely not work, I thought two things. One, what if it did? What if there was a slight chance? There's 1,000 reasons that I should not do it, 1,000 reasons that it won't work. Do I need 1,000 reasons for it to work, or do I only need one or two ways that it could work? And so I thought to myself, if I only need one or two ways that it could work, is that something that I may be able to figure out? Maybe. And then two, I didn't have the store before I applied. So what did I have to lose? If I got rejected or if my application was lost somewhere because they're like, who's this guy? I think he is thinking that he can do this. I would not have lost anything except for, a couple of minutes of time it took to put the concept together, package it in a way that I felt comfortable submitting it. And so I figured, why not? And as I went through the process, there's this thing about kind of faking it till you make it. I submitted it after staring at it for a really long time, trying to perfect it, thinking that it's not right. Finally submitted it. And then a funny thing happened after I submitted. I started to allow myself to think about what would happen if I was successful. If they shortlisted me, where would I start to look for funding? Who would I reach out to? What sort of things would they may want? If I was successful, what other product lines and categories would I want to include in this store? If I was successful, what would I want the store to look like? How would I go about starting that process? How would I go about finding people to work with? And as I did more and more, I started to convince myself that this thing was absolutely going to happen for me, and that I happened to be in the point in time, in the place that allowed this opportunity to come into my realm of knowledge, to be able to put all of the experience and knowledge and network and everything that I have had accumulated up to that point, that everything converged in that moment for this to be for me. There's a thing I mean, old people say it all the time. I don't know if there's anyone that still says it, which says, what's for you, for you. And so I just convinced myself that, hey, maybe this is what's for me. And I was lucky enough to be able to see it through to this point. And right now, we've been thriving. And to think that, you know, my retail store is amongst the likes of the Myoceans and the Baharis and the Bahama Handprints, the Grey Cliffs. I think every day that I'm at the store, I shouldn't be here. And I really shouldn't. They all have the experience. They all would have been around for a really long time. But there I am. So I guess it was for me.
That's awesome. I love that. That's a great closing point. Matthew, you want to hop on?
Well deserved.
Worked very hard, worked tirelessly. And yeah, this is probably just the first store that's going to come.
I got some big plans, big plans. But I will say, I mean, in all honesty, you know, I didn't know whether or not this was the forum for it, but I'm more than happy to, you know, dive into more details, look under the hood to the extent that may add some value to anyone that you guys are working with, to be able to see like how I came to the conclusions around pricing and everything else that I've been working on. If you think it'll add value in some forum, then let me know, and I'm happy to do that.
Definitely. I was actually going to ask you if you can give a contact email. Don't give out your phone number to the internet, but a contact email so that people
Well,
reach
I'll
out to you.
say this, that you could supply that to us and we will pass it on to
Yeah,
Sure,
to the
not a problem.
relevant people.
yeah.
As
Not a
this is
problem.
going to be in very wide distribution. Our,
Yeah.
you know, the company email is there. We just want to be a filter between you and them to make sure that you're not unduly inundated with insincere people. That's all.
Sure, and it could be a situation where it's a more intimate setting, you know, based on, you know, your selection of people or the forum that you think makes sense for it to happen, and we can go from there. I'll follow you guys' lead on that.
Okay. Sounds good. Matthew, you want to take us out?
No, I'm going to leave this honor to you, Shauna. This is your brainchild, and so I do want to take time to thank you very much. The few sessions that I have been in, I've enjoyed immensely, and I hope that participants have gotten some value from my presence. As always, very enjoyable for me. Very good to see you, Tino.
Likewise, it's been too long.
Indeed.
Yes. So thank you, Tino, so much for taking time out. This has been a really good conversation. I think that more people like you need to have, you know, more open conversation about what the process is, because there's so much mystery mixed with secrets, mixed with, you know, just not sure what to do. And so helping to pull back the veil, I think, helps us as an ecosystem, as a community. So we want to thank everyone who joined us for this particular session, who may have caught all of the sessions or some of the other sessions. We do appreciate you watching. We hope this has been helpful to you. And so if you need to contact us, definitely you can reach out to contact@arrowlink.com. We would be happy to put you in touch with Tino. If you are looking for further help, if you need advisory services from ArrowLink, consulting services, pitch services, we are here to serve you as well. So thank you. Take care.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
You too.
Hi, everybody.